You ever have your dream come true and get handcuffed by reality at the same time? That's what happened to me. I was 45 minutes into moving into my first home, my actual name on the deed, key in hand, grown-up dream home, when a woman in unicorn pajamas showed up and accused me of robbing it. I wish I were joking. One second, I'm lugging my gaming chair off a U-Haul with my buddy Tyler, cracking jokes about finally escaping apartment life, and the next, I'm being interrogated on my front lawn by someone who looked like she just crawled out of a children's book and wandered into a crime thriller. Clipboard in one hand, fury in the other, she marched up like a mall cop on a power trip, demanding to know what exactly is going on here. As if the answer wasn't painfully obvious, I was moving in, to my house, with my stuff. But according to her, my ergonomic desk setup was contraband, and Tyler's playlist was apparently part of a covert distraction technique. Cassandra Hayward, the self-proclaimed sheriff of our neighborhood, turned the happiest day of my life into a complete nightmare. One minute I was unpacking dreams, the next I was defending myself from a pajama-clad HOA warrior wielding a clipboard like it came with handcuffs. But here's what she didn't know. I might be the quiet guy with the glasses and the bad posture, but when you push me, I don't push back. I reprogrammed the whole game, and trust me, this story doesn't end with me backing down. It ends with receipts, poetic justice, and one very empty house for sale. So buckle in. You're about to hear how I turned passive aggression into precision strategy and took down the queen of fake authority. If you've ever had your own run-in with a power-tripping neighbor, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see just how many of us have been through HOA hell. She introduced herself with the kind of fake authority that smells like expired pepper spray. Cassandra Hayward, neighborhood compliance representative, as if that title gave her the right to audit my welcome mat. She squinted at my boxes like she was solving a mystery, then asked to see proof of ownership. "Anyone can buy a lockbox and pretend," she said, waving her clipboard like a sword. "We've had incidents before." "What incidents? Did someone smuggle in a prohibited lawn gnome?" Cassandra walked around the truck, taking photos of my possessions, like she was cataloging evidence, pointing out violations that didn't exist yet. She narrowed her eyes at my black doormat and muttered something about aesthetic cohesion. Tyler leaned over and whispered, "Bro, is this a moving-in hazing ritual or is she for real?" Oh, she was real delusional, and she was just getting started. Now, I've always been the let's not cause a scene type. I smiled, introduced myself, told her I worked in tech, and even thanked her for her vigilance. But her suspicion only grew stronger, like I'd triggered a setting in her HOA alarm system. "I'll need to confirm your documents with the HOA board," she sniffed, as if she had a hotline to some suburban CIA. "We take community integrity seriously here in Crescent Vale Estate." Apparently nothing says integrity like snooping through someone's moving boxes in house slippers shaped like bunnies. The irony? Her own porch was cluttered with mismatched wind chimes and a lawn flamingo with a missing leg. I bit my tongue, no need to feed the troll in her natural habitat. But something told me this wasn't a one-time interruption. This was a trailer for the horror movie I had just bought a starring role in. And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, the sirens came. Loud, fast, coming straight down my street. Tyler and I exchanged a look, equal parts disbelief and dread. "She didn't," he said. "She did," I replied, watching the cruiser pull up like it had VIP access to our anxiety. Cassandra dashed out from behind a bush like she'd been rehearsing her lines all morning. "Officer, thank goodness," she shouted, arms flailing like she was directing airport traffic. "I've been observing suspicious behavior for over an hour. The officer," tall, mid-40s, clearly seasoned, looked at her, then at us, then back at her like he'd just been pulled into the world's dumbest sitcom. I handed over everything. License, deed, welcome letter. He checked the paperwork, nodded, and looked mildly embarrassed to be part of whatever this was. "Everything seems in order," he said gently. But Cassandra wasn't done. "They're hiding something. No one brings that many wires into a home unless they're setting up surveillance or something shady. "Lady, I build games, not wiretap the Pentagon." By the time Officer Tully drove off with a shake of the head and a good luck, I realized something. Cassandra wasn't just nosy. She wasn't just eccentric. She was an HOA Karen with a clipboard and a vendetta, and I had somehow become her white whale. I stood in my new driveway, box in hand, and took a deep breath. The dream house was still mine, but now it came with its very own boss level. The unicorn pajamas had declared war, and I knew right then. This wasn't going to be over with just one awkward encounter. No. This was going to be a full-on suburban showdown. And I was about to start learning all the weird, wonderful, and wildly unjust rules of this twisted little kingdom, one absurd violation at a time. The moment I heard sirens, my heart dropped like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Not because I had anything to hide. I was literally just moving boxes into my own house. But because deep down, I knew who'd called them, and I knew she'd be waiting. Sure enough, by the time the cruiser turned onto my street, there she was, Cassandra Hayward, Crescent Vale's answer to Judge Judy, except less robes, more unicorn pajamas, and a clipboard that looked like it had seen something. She was standing at the end of her driveway like she was flagging down a plane, one hand up, the other holding that clipboard like a suburban sword. The cop pulled up, engine still rumbling, and out stepped Officer James Tully. Late 40s, calm demeanor, and the expression of a man who'd once had to mediate a fight over tomato plants. He scanned the scene slowly. 2 sweaty guys, a moving truck, no broken windows, and I could see the flicker of this again, settle behind his eyes. Before I could say a word, Cassandra launched into her monologue like she'd been practicing in front of the mirror. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I've been monitoring these 2 for suspicious behavior. No moving permits, no confirmation from the HOA, and they've been hauling unregistered electronics into the residence for over an hour. I'm concerned we're witnessing an unauthorized occupation. You'd think Tyler and I were part of an international smuggling ring instead of just 2 dudes wrestling a gaming chair through a front door." I didn't interrupt. I wanted him to hear the whole thing, the tone, the assumptions, the word monitoring. She said it like she worked for the NSA. The officer gave her the kind of polite nod you reserve for unstable relatives at Thanksgiving, and finally turned to me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" And I could tell this wasn't his first Cassandra call. I kept it simple. "Yes, sir. My name's Elliot Graves. I closed on this property last Friday. I've got my ID, the deed, and the welcome packet from the real estate office right here." I handed it over, and he took his time, flipping through, cross-referencing names, addresses, even the embossed seal like he was giving it a genuine inspection. Meanwhile, Cassandra stood behind him, muttering like a conspiracy theorist with a thesaurus. "Forgery's not hard these days. People print anything. We have standards for a reason." Standards. There it was again. The battle cry of the clipboard brigade. She said it like it was capitalized. Officer Tully didn't flinch. When he finished scanning the documents, he looked back at her and gave the kind of long, measured breath that said, "I know this isn't going to go over well. Ma'am, this documentation appears valid. Mr. Graves is the legal owner of the home." It should have ended there. But Cassandra wasn't going down without a scene. "Appearances can be deceiving," she snapped. "Anyone can make documents look official. We need verification from the HOA board and a security background check. This is a gated community. We have rules." Officer Tully raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a gated community." I had to stifle a laugh. Cassandra's eye twitched, just slightly, before she adjusted her slippers and tried to recover. "I meant gated in spirit." Tyler coughed to cover a snort. I stood quiet, calm, but my patience was thinning. Not because of the accusation, I expected that by now, but because of the performance. She wasn't just suspicious, she was invested. She had built a narrative, and I was ruining her climax with facts. I looked around, wondering if anyone else was watching. That's when I saw the curtain shift across the street. Enter Martha Daly, retired librarian, local legend, and possibly the only person in the zip code who could make Cassandra back down without raising her voice. She stepped out of her front door like a queen with a teacup. "Cassandra," she called calmly, "you've made your point. Let's not waste the officer's time." Cassandra turned to protest, but Martha walked straight across the street, slippers tapping the pavement like punctuation. She looked at Officer Tully, gave a small nod, then turned to me. "You must be Mr. Graves. I spoke with your real estate agent last week. Welcome to Crescent Vale." Her voice had that warm firmness that only comes from decades of library discipline and shutting down teenage chaos. Cassandra stood frozen, clipboard slack, as if Martha had pulled the plug on her internal generator. Officer Tully gave a small smile. "Seems like everything checks out. Mr. Graves, I'm sorry for the inconvenience." I nodded, genuinely appreciating the professionalism, even as the absurdity of the moment simmered under the surface. "No worries, officer. I get it. Just wasn't the housewarming I expected." He chuckled, gave Cassandra one last look, part warning, part "please don't make me come back," and headed to his cruiser. As the sirens faded into the distance, Cassandra turned and stormed off without another word, muttering something about escalation protocols and neighborhood vigilance. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about me. Not really. It was about control. Cassandra didn't want truth. She wanted territory. And I had just unknowingly parked my moving truck right in the middle of it. Tyler walked over, box in hand, and said, "That was the weirdest episode of Cops I've ever seen." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, and I think it's a series. Because here's the thing. This wasn't the end of it." Cassandra had retreated, but only to reload. She'd tasted disruption, and like a cat with a laser pointer, she wasn't about to let go. The way she walked off told me one thing. She hadn't been defeated. She'd been delayed. And if a police visit was her opening move, I could only imagine what her middle game looked like. I stood on my porch, sweating, tired, and already regretting every homeownership seminar that didn't warn me about neighborhood sheriffs with stationary obsessions. But one thing was clear. I was now officially a character in Cassandra's drama. And the next act was coming whether I liked it or not. Stick around, it gets even better. So the cops left, Cassandra sulked back to her clipboard kingdom, and I thought maybe, that would be the end of it. But turns out I was just the latest level in her HOA video game, and she wasn't even halfway through the tutorial, because what came next wasn't another confrontation. It was paperwork. Weaponized, excessive, and aimed straight at my peace of mind. If you think this unicorn pajama saga peaked with a police cruiser, think again. The real war was fought in envelopes, violations, and HOA fine print written in passive-aggressive bold. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see what happens when Cassandra trades her clipboard for legal threats, and I start playing the long game. Trust me, you don't want to miss how I turned her own rulebook against her. Part 3's coming up, and let's just say the fines get funnier and the revenge gets smarter. Exactly 1 week after the sirens, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door, red letters shouting an immediate action required, like I'd been caught smuggling goats or launching fireworks indoors. Inside was a 5-page violation notice that read more like a sitcom script than a legal document. First up, my black doormat was inappropriately dark and visually jarring compared to community tone, followed by ergonomic gaming chair visible from the street through a west-facing window during daylight hours creates visual clutter. Oh, and my mailbox? Approximately 1.2 inches higher than Crescent Vale uniform elevation standards. That's right, 1.2 inches. The kind of thing you need a laser level, a free afternoon, and a lack of soul to even notice. Total fine? $475.00. Apparently, Cassandra had moved from paranoia to paperwork, and she'd brought a ruler. At first I laughed, like really laughed, the kind of laughter you get when you're too stunned to be mad and the only reasonable response is disbelief. But that laugh started to curdle by the 3rd page, when I realized these weren't just nitpicks. This was a hit list. The violations were absurd, yes, but they were specific, personal. Like someone had walked around my property with a clipboard and binoculars, just waiting to be offended by whatever didn't match their suburban vision board. That someone, of course, wore unicorn pajamas and a smirk, And the more I read, the more I felt this wasn't random. This was Cassandra's second act. I wasn't just the new guy anymore. I was the target. And I knew, deep down, she wasn't done. At night, I stood in my driveway looking at my perfectly normal mailbox, wondering how 1.2 inches had turned into a federal offense. Then I noticed something that made my stomach knot. 2 sets of footprints in the mulch by the side of the house. Not deep, but fresh. Like someone had tiptoed up to the window, just far enough to peek in and judge my furniture arrangement. I turned slowly, looked up the street, and there she was. Cassandra, standing at her window half concealed behind a curtain, sipping tea like a Bond villain on break. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just watching. She was studying, measuring, cataloging, and I'd been living in her fishbowl without even knowing it. Suddenly, my cozy starter home felt like a stage, and I was starring in a show I didn't audition for. I needed answers, or at least context, so I walked over to Martha Daly's place the next evening with a peace offering, chamomile tea, and a copy of The Violation Packet. She welcomed me in like a retired detective greeting a rookie. When I handed her the paperwork, she didn't even flinch. "Black doormat, huh?" she said, flipping through. She gave the Chen family a fine for decorative pumpkins in September, said it seasonally disrupted the uniformity of the entryway. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a folder thick enough to be a first draft of a novel. Inside were copies of violation letters, emails, photos, years' worth of Cassandra's greatest hits. She had fined the Rodriguez kids for visible tricycles, flagged the Morales family for wind chimes, and once accused someone of hosting an unregistered gathering that turned out to be a toddler's birthday party. Martha closed the folder and gave me the kind of look that lets you know you're not crazy, just new. "We call her the compliance queen," she said, half smiling. "She's not officially on the HOA board, but she's persuasive. David, our actual president, he avoids confrontation like the plague, so Cassandra fills the vacuum." It all made sense. The sirens weren't a fluke. The fines weren't isolated. This was her pattern. Control through intimidation, disguised as concern for community standards. I left Martha's house with 2 thoughts. First, I wasn't alone. Second, this wasn't a neighborly misunderstanding anymore. This was a campaign, and I was going to need more than politeness to survive the next round. As I sat down that night with the violations laid out on my dining table like battlefield plans, something in me shifted. This wasn't just annoying anymore. It was calculated. I couldn't laugh it off. I couldn't ignore it. Cassandra had turned my dream into a legal landmine, and I was done playing nice. She had the clipboard, fine, but I had something better. Documentation, data, and the kind of obsessive personality that turns HOA harassment into a spreadsheet. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to go full nerd avenger on the queen of petty power. And if you think $475.00 in bogus fines was enough to scare me off, well, you haven't seen me in strategic mode yet. Stick around, the counterattack's coming, and it starts with a camera. The morning after I stacked the last violation notice like a sad little trophy pile, I sat down with my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and did what any game developer with a grudge would do. I opened a new project folder. But this one wasn't titled Adventure Quest 2 or Space Otters of Doom. No, this was labeled Cassandra_HOA_tyrant_masterfile. Because if she was going to keep playing clipboard commando, I was going to start playing back, with timestamps, spreadsheets, surveillance, and more systematic rage than a dropped packet during a live stream. This wasn't about getting even, it was about getting structured. I wasn't building a case. I was building a firewall. Step 1 was a complete harassment tracker. I logged every notice, date-stamped it, categorized the violation, real, fake, fabricated, fantasy, and cross-referenced each one with actual HOA bylaws. Turns out, over 70% of her complaints weren't even backed by enforceable rules. They were just strongly worded suggestions dressed up as law. Step 2, installed discrete security cameras and motion sensors with wide-angle coverage of my property, not to spy, but to log. If Cassandra stepped on my lawn again with that clipboard and bad energy, I'd have it all, time-coded and archived. Step 3. I'd built an HOA regulation matrix in a spreadsheet with color-coded tabs that would have made Martha Stewart weep. Every time she misquoted a rule, I had the clause, subsection, and legal footnote ready like I was prepping for trial in suburban court. Still with me? Good, because this was only the warm-up. Martha was impressed. "You've built a stronger system than the actual HOA office," she chuckled over tea one evening. She also brought me a flash drive. "I figured you'd want this," she said, eyes gleaming with that quiet rebellion only grandmothers and librarians truly master. On it were scans of an incident from Cassandra's previous neighborhood. Apparently she'd served on another HOA board 2 towns over. Served, being generous, more like reigned until revolt. Multiple complaints had been filed, and eventually she'd been removed from the board entirely after residents reported excessive enforcement, unauthorized inspections, and hostile conduct. Oh, and there was a restraining order. A real one, filed by a couple she accused of violating decorative harmony because their patio furniture had polka dots. Not a joke. I stared at the documents like I'd discovered her villain origin story. This wasn't just neighborhood drama. This was a pattern. So I reached out to Dean Roper, Crescent Vale's current HOA president, hoping logic might do what kindness couldn't. Dean, mid-50s, polite, and permanently hunched like he was dodging conflict, met me at the community clubhouse. I came with folders, printouts, and annotated bylaws like a nerdy Sherlock Holmes. "Mr. Graves," he said, nervously adjusting his glasses, "I understand your concern, but Cassandra's, well, she's very involved." Involved? That was his word. Like a raccoon in your attic is involved. I laid out everything. Her pattern, the invalid violations, the restraining order, even a list of neighbors she'd targeted. Dean looked at the papers, sighed, and said, "I'd just try to keep things quiet." Translation, Cassandra scared him more than any legal document ever could, and honestly, I didn't blame him. She'd weaponized boredom into bureaucracy, but I wasn't about to let quiet be the price of peace. That's when Tyler, sweet, sarcastic, dashcam owning Tyler, texted me out of nowhere. "Bro, you might want to hear this." We met that night at his place, cracked open a couple of beers and plugged his dashcam footage into the TV. It was from the day Cassandra called the cops. After the cruiser left while I was inside unpacking cables, the cam picked up Cassandra walking past the truck and muttering to a neighbor, "I don't care what paperwork he's got, he doesn't belong here. I'll make sure that outsider doesn't last a month." I stared at the screen, heat rising in my chest, not from anger, but clarity. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was running a campaign. Eviction by paperwork, disguised as civic duty. And I just caught her saying it out loud. I made 4 copies of that video, one for me, one for Martha, one for Dean, whether he wanted it or not, and one for the day I knew was coming, when all the rules, all the files, and all the quiet planning would crash into Cassandra's cardboard empire of control. Because here's the thing about people like her. They count on you being disorganized, emotional, alone. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had neighbors, evidence, and a growing desire to turn every ridiculous fine into a stepping stone towards something bigger. I wasn't just defending my house. I was exposing her system. And what started as a welcome mat violation was about to become a full-blown reckoning. Keep watching. The clipboard is about to crack. So now I had the receipts, the footage, and a digital paper trail that could make a lawyer whistle. Cassandra wasn't just an overzealous neighbor. She was a repeat offender with a pattern of intimidation, and I was done playing defense. The question wasn't if she'd strike again. It was how big her next move would be, and whether the system she built would finally collapse under the weight of her own clipboard. If you thought the fines were petty And the restraining order was wild. Just wait until you see what happens when Cassandra calls a special HOA meeting to try and have me removed from the neighborhood entirely. You're not going to want to miss that showdown. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss the next chapter in this real-life HOA saga, because the boardroom battle is coming, and trust me, the punchlines and the payback are just getting started. I got the email on a Monday. Subject line: Emergency HOA board meeting, mandatory. It was sent to all Crescent Vale residents, but I didn't need to open it to know who was behind it. Cassandra had finally moved to her endgame. After weeks of clipboard crusading, phantom violations, and psychological warfare disguised as neighborhood order, she was calling the tribunal. Her goal: to have me formally censured and, if she got her way, voted out of the community for disruptive. Now, in any sane zip code, this would have sounded ridiculous, but this was Cassandra's kingdom, and I knew better than to underestimate a woman who used her paper shredder more than her oven. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Crescent Vale Community Center, and by 6:30 p.m. the place was packed. Folding chairs were pulled from closets. Neighbors who hadn't shown their faces in months filed in with wide eyes and whispered predictions. Tyler showed up with popcorn, actual popcorn, because of course he did. At the front sat the HOA board, President Dean Roper, still visibly allergic to conflict, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. And then there was Cassandra. No pajamas this time. She came dressed like a disgraced CEO at a redemption press conference. Navy blazer, pearls, 3-ring binders stacked like legal ammunition. She wasn't just prepared, she was performing. Cassandra opened with a speech that would have made a better soap opera monologue than a community address. Fellow residents, I come before you not as a representative of rules, but as a guardian of our shared peace. In recent weeks, we have faced an erosion of standards, a disrespect for harmony, and the infiltration of behavior unbecoming of Crescent Vale living. She used phrases like moral decay and architectural deviance, and at one point referred to my security cameras as civilian surveillance tools. She passed out color-coded handouts showing photos of my gaming chair, my visually disruptive mailbox, and, my personal favorite, a still image of me walking barefoot to get the mail as an example of property blurring. I sat there, quiet, respectful, amused. Because I wasn't here to match her drama, I was here to end it. When she finally wrapped up her indictment of my very existence, Dean looked at me with a weak nod. Mr. Graves, would you like to respond? I stood up, walked to the front, and plugged in a flash drive. Yes, thank you. I think it's time we all heard something. First, I played the audio clip from Tyler's dash cam. Cassandra's voice rang out, crystal clear. I don't care what paperwork he's got. He doesn't belong here. I'll make sure that outsider doesn't last a month. The room went quiet. No whispers, no popcorn chewing, just stunned silence. Then I distributed copies of public court records from Cassandra's previous HOA. The removal, the restraining order, the documented harassment. This isn't new, I said. This is Cassandra's pattern. What's new is that someone finally documented it. And then I dropped the bomb, the financial records. With Martha's help and a few brave board insiders, I'd traced over $6,000, 0 cents, in HOA funds that had been quietly funneled into consulting expenses and security evaluations, all of which led back to Cassandra's personal bank accounts and her custody lawyer. Every slide I presented had source citations, dates, and signatures. This wasn't a revenge plan. It was a public audit. Cassandra tried to interrupt twice, but Dean, to his credit, held up his hand. Let him finish. When I got to the final page, a reimbursement receipt for audio detection perimeter tools, which turned out to be a set of $39.00 baby monitors she'd mounted to her fence, it was like the room collectively exhaled. Her argument collapsed like a wet cardboard clipboard. Then came the part I didn't expect, the testimonials. One by one, neighbors stood up. Mrs. Chen, voice trembling, described receiving 5 violations in 2 weeks for improper gnome symmetry. The Johnsons shared how their children stopped playing outside after Cassandra told them their sidewalk chalk art was a graffiti gateway. A retired veteran named Frank recounted being accused of patriotic overexpression for flying a flag on Memorial Day. The stories poured out. And suddenly it wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. The entire neighborhood had been bullied into silence, and now, thanks to a few receipts and one very loud audio clip, everyone had found their voice. It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial, a reckoning, a release. Dean cleared his throat. "We're going to take a vote. First, to strip Ms. Hayward of all official and unofficial HOA authority. Second, to authorize a full audit of HOA funds. And third, to appoint Mr. Graves to the Interim Compliance Committee." I didn't need to count. The show of hands was unanimous. Even the board members, who looked like statues, raised their arms. Cassandra didn't wait for the gavel. She stood, red-faced, trembling, binder under one arm, and shouted, "You're all fools! He manipulated you! This neighborhood will fall apart without order!" She turned to me, eyes wild. "This isn't over!" Then she stormed out, heels clicking like a broken metronome on tile, leaving behind a room full of neighbors blinking at each other like they'd just survived a tornado in khakis. I sat back down as Tyler leaned over. "Well," he whispered, "guess that's what they mean by a public service announcement." Martha gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. And Dean, who looked 10 pounds lighter now that the clipboard queen had officially lost her crown, gave me a small nod. For the first time since I moved into Crescent Vale, I felt something that had been missing all along. Peace. But not the fragile kind you get by staying quiet. The earned kind. The kind you defend. The kind that finally lets you breathe in your own home without wondering who's watching your mailbox. Of course, Cassandra wasn't done trying, not yet, but she was done pretending to be untouchable. And the next move, it was mine. Stick with me, because what happens after this meltdown might just be the best part. 3 days after the tribunal meltdown, Crescentvale was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. No violation notices, no mysterious knocks at dusk, no clipboard silhouettes pacing behind curtains. It was the kind of peace you don't notice until it returns, like background noise finally shutting off. But while the community exhaled, Cassandra's world unraveled. The board submitted the audit files, and within a week she was formally charged with HOA fund misappropriation. The number wasn't just $6,000, 0 cents. It ballooned to over $8,400, 0 cents, once the rest of her consulting services were examined. Her lawyer, the same one she used in her custody case, tried to negotiate, but the HOA wasn't playing defense anymore. This time, Cassandra didn't have control. She had consequences. Her appeal failed faster than one of her window-based infractions. Turns out, billing the HOA for private legal expenses and camera equipment you mount facing your neighbor's windows doesn't land well in court, or in Crescent Vale's community newsletter. Once the fines hit and the legal process kicked in, her mortgage cracked. Between restitution, legal fees, and a reputation that made even Zillow raise an eyebrow, Cassandra was forced to put her house on the market. Watching her load up that moving truck was surreal. There she was, same scowl, same clipboard tucked under one arm like a lifeline, except this time no one flinched when she passed. She didn't wave, no one waved back. The only sound was the garage door closing for the last time. And just like that, the HOA's unofficial tyrant became its most official cautionary tale. A month later, her replacement moved in, a young immigrant couple, Javier and Lien, with 2 energetic kids and a welcome mat that read, "Home is here." And for once, it really was. The neighborhood showed up with pies, casseroles, tools, folding chairs, things people had once hidden behind hedges in fear of being non-compliant. I walked over that afternoon, handed them a simple basket, cookies, a handwritten note, and the full, updated HOA charter printed in plain English. Javier laughed when he saw it. "This is the friendliest paperwork I've ever received." That was the whole point. Where Cassandra had wielded rules like a sword, we decided to make them feel more like guidelines for actual living. You know, human stuff. Plants, flags, front porch conversations. None of it criminalized anymore. Over the next few weeks, the changes came fast. The board met twice to rewrite the charter, with input from everyone. Yes, everyone, even Mr. Walker, who hadn't spoken since 2003. We removed the nonsense rules, clarified the vague ones, and added a new clause. No enforcement shall be made through intimidation, surveillance, or personal vendetta. That one was mine. I also set up a digital forum for residents to report concerns anonymously or just, borrow a ladder. Then we launched a monthly block meetup. Marta hosted the first one, complete with lemonade, a bingo board of old Cassandra phrases. Visually offensive shrubbery was a fan favorite, and more laughter than I'd heard since moving in. The place wasn't just recovering, it was healing. And me, I didn't just change addresses, I changed altogether. The quiet nerd who once tried to avoid eye contact with neighbors was now helping rewrite housing policy. I'd gone from documenting gaming bugs to documenting legal ones. What started as self-defense became something bigger, standing up not just for my own peace, but for everyone else's. I wasn't a hero, and I wasn't trying to be. I just knew what it felt like to be watched, doubted, harassed, and if I could prevent someone else from getting the Welcome to HOA Warfare starter pack, then yeah, I was going to. As for Cassandra, the last I heard, she'd tried pulling the same act at a condo complex 2 cities over. She lasted 6 weeks before getting hit with a restraining order for yelling at someone's lawn decoration. These days, when I walk outside, it feels like Crescent Vale finally matches the brochure. Kids playing, dogs barking at squirrels, Mr. Chen watering his aggressively happy gnome garden, and laughter spilling out of open garage doors. Sometimes I pause on my porch, sip my coffee, and remember how it all started, with a doormat that was too black and a woman convinced that order was more important than people. But now? Her clipboard has been replaced by a welcome basket, her shadow replaced by sunlight, and her control replaced by a community that actually acts like one. She wanted control. What she got was closure. For everyone else. She tried to evict me with a clipboard. I responded with a codebase of facts and a village of voices. And the real punchline? I still have that doormat, just a little dustier and far more respected. So, what started with a clipboard and a false call to 911 ended with justice, unity, and a community finally reclaiming its soul. I didn't just fight back, I found my voice. And somewhere between surveillance cameras and HOA clauses, I stopped being the quiet new guy and became someone who could walk his own neighborhood with his head high and his shoulders relaxed. Not because the fight was easy, but because it was worth it. What this whole wild ride taught me is simple. Peace isn't passive. It's not something you get by staying silent or hoping someone else steps in. It's something you build, line by line, rule by rule, neighbor by neighbor. You can't outshout a bully, but you can outthink one. You can outwork one, and when you stand for what's right, with truth in your back pocket and community by your side, even the loudest clipboard in the subdivision has to sit down. If you've ever felt powerless in your own home, doubted your place in a neighborhood, or been told to shrink so someone else could feel big, let this story be your reminder. You belong, you have rights, you have allies. And sometimes the best way to win is to stay calm, get smart, and keep the receipts. If this story struck a chord, if you laughed, learned, or just felt seen, go ahead and leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your HOA horror stories, and most of all, like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next round of stories where karma shows up right on time, clipboard or not. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We collect victories, one HOA at a time.